Thanks so much, everybody. Yeah, so my name is Sam Magor. I work for Humane World for Animals UK. You might know us as Humane Society International. That was our previous name, and we rebranded about a month ago. Today I'm going to be talking to you a bit about how we can work with civil servants to better further our aims for animal protection. So this is just a little overview of my talk. So I'm going to start with a bit about my background in the civil service. I'm also going to talk about the kind of structure and the purpose of the civil service. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the responsibility for animal protection policies within the civil service. Then I'm going to give a bit of a run through of how policies are developed within the civil service. And also finish off by talking about how we can help civil servants to meet our aims of better protecting animals. I will say that probably this talk is going to be, well, hopefully everyone will be able to get something useful from this talk, but it's probably most useful for people who have some kind of specific policy asks of the government and where you've kind of worked through those policy asks in some detail and have suggestions for the government around how they can address those policy asks. And also, ideally, where you have some kind of evidence and data to back up the suggestions that you're trying to make. I would also say I have an hour for this talk. I don't think I'm going to be doing anything like an hour. I expect that probably my talk will be about half an hour, and then we can do kind of 10, 15 minutes for questions, and then I will let you escape to all the other really interesting talks that are going on. Also to caveat, I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on this issue necessarily. There'll be other people in this room and of course at this conference who have a lot more experience than I do of engaging civil service and government on animal protection issues. But what I do have is some experience of working in the civil service, which has given me a good understanding of how the civil service works and also allowed me to pick up some kind of tips and tricks for how we can best engage with civil servants. So just starting briefly with a little bit of information about my background. So I actually ended up in the civil service slightly by accident. I ended up working for, after I finished my legal training, I ended up working for a body called the Law Commission of England and Wales. I spent a year working there as a researcher. And I didn't know it at the time, but this was a government agency that employs civil servants. So my intention at that time was to go and become a lawyer. I wanted to be a barrister. But in that role, I ended up kind of picking up the policy bug, and I decided that I would stay in the civil service for a bit longer. I then moved into another role in another government agency, also as a civil servant. I worked for the Office of the Parliamentary Council, which is a body that drafts legislation for the government. So I spent a year there also working as a researcher. And then after that, I decided to kind of plunge in, dive in the deep end, and I ended up in a central government department. At the time, it was called the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. Angela Rayner has recently renamed that because the concept of levelling up has been a bit of a flop. I don't know if anyone knows that, but yeah, it's now, I think, gone back to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So I spent, 2 years working as a policy advisor, working on environmental policy and net zero. And this was between, I think it was 2022 and 2024. And this was kind of during the kind of dying breaths of the last Conservative government, I would say. And they were really in a time of kind of significant policy upheaval. So during my time working there, I saw lots and lots of policy changes. There was lots of rowing back on particularly environmental and net zero commitments, and also lots of ministerial changes. I was only in the department for 2 years, and I think that there were 4 ministers who were responsible for my policy area in that time. So one was leaving every 6 months or so. So it was a really interesting time to work for government. Lots of thinking on your feet, lots of adapting to new circumstances, and lots of trying and struggling to get policy across the line. So, what is a civil servant? So, there are about 500,000 civil servants working in the UK. But what are they all doing, and what is the civil service? So, the first thing to say is that civil servants are employed by the Crown. So you might think that this rather stern-looking man here, Keir Starmer, is the boss of civil servants, but actually it is this guy right here who they are all answerable to, and I will let you kind of draw your own conclusions about that. Yeah, so employed by the Crown and work in a variety of different ways. So primarily they are employed to work in ministerial departments. So there are 24 ministerial government departments, including things like DEFRA, Ministry of Justice, Home Office, Cabinet Office. Also, there are non-ministerial departments. So these are government departments which are not headed up by a government minister. And this will include things like the Charity Commission and the Food Standards Agency. And then there are around 400 other agencies and public bodies which employ civil servants. And for our purposes, this includes things like the Environment Agency and Natural England. In terms of what they're all doing, so lots and lots of civil servants are employed in customer-facing roles and kind of service delivery roles. There are also lots of kind of technical experts and specialists who work in the civil service who are kind of lawyers or maybe software developers, scientists, web developers, people like that. And then there are lots and lots of policy roles. So that is the focus of this talk today, because when we are thinking about engaging the civil service on animal protection issues, we are chiefly thinking about engaging with people working in animal-related policy roles. So the civil service is a kind of subset of the public service, and within the public service, you also have people like teachers, doctors, nurses, police. So these are public servants, but they are not civil servants. So it's useful to have that distinction. And in terms of the most important thing on this slide, I would say it's the fact that civil servants, they work for the government of the day. But when you sign up to be a civil servant, you sign up to something called the Civil Service Code. And this means that you have to be politically impartial. So your role, really, as a policy person in the civil service is to provide the minister that you're working with expert advice on the policy that they are trying to progress with. But you are not there to provide them with political advice. You do not run with any kind of political agenda. And this is different from special advisors, or you might know them as SPADs, who are also technically civil servants, but they are there specifically to provide ministers with a political angle to the policy that they are putting forward, whereas civil servants provide ministers with advice to meet their policy aims, but don't do that with any kind of political agenda. So I thought it would be useful to very briefly touch on the kind of structure of a government department. So this is just the structure on the civil service side. So obviously government departments, ministerial government departments are headed up by a Secretary of State, and then there are also various junior ministers who work in that department. But on the civil service side, government departments are headed up by a permanent secretary. This is obviously a kind of oversimplification, and different departments are structured slightly differently. And also the people in the department might have slightly different titles, but this is just kind of a good guide for what a department looks like. So you have the permanent secretary at the top, and then underneath them, you have a range of different director generals, and they are all responsible for different either policy or operational roles within the department. And then you move further down, and then you have a range of directors. So just to keep this slide simpler, I've just kind of followed one of these branches down, but obviously you get exactly the same with all the other director generals. So on a particular policy, you have Director General who's heading it up, and then directors, and then you have deputy directors, And then at the bottom there, you'll see the final 4 positions. Those are the people that make up a kind of single policy team. And I've got 4 people there. That is kind of an average size of a policy team, but it will depend on the kind of how big the policy area is and also kind of how complex it is. So the useful thing to note here is that when you are engaging civil servants on a particular policy ask, then almost always you're engaging at the deputy director level, the grade 6 level, or possibly the grade 7 level. And the reason why it's useful to know that is, as you can see from this slide, there are several people who sit above them even before you get to the ministerial level. So there are several people who the person that you're talking to is going to have to convince of your policy on top of that person. So when you're talking to someone about your policy, you need to be thinking not only about how you can convince them, you also need to be thinking about how you can furnish them with the arguments that they're going to need to convince the people that sit further above them in the chain before you get to the ministerial level. And I will come back to that a bit later in the talk. So which departments do we need to engage? So as I said earlier, there are 24 government departments headed up by a Secretary of State in the UK government. And the most obvious one that we would want to engage on animal protection issues is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the top left-hand corner. You might know them as DEFRA. So this is the department most obviously that we'll want to engage because they are responsible for all of our food and farming policy, and they are also responsible for lots of the policies that affect wildlife and nature. So they are the people that we want to be our best friends, basically, within government. But there are also lots of other departments that we'll want to engage too. And this is because the kind of ways that we use and have animals have an impact on almost all parts of our life. Animals, they're affected in what we eat and the pets that we have and the way that we have an impact on the natural world. And so it makes sense that different departments, most different departments, are making policy that has an impact on animals to a greater or lesser extent. So this is not all of them. This is just a handful of some of the most obvious ones that make policy that affects animals, but there are lots of other ones too. So I would say in terms of when you're thinking about a particular policy that you're working on, it's important to think which department or departments do I need to engage on this? And sometimes it will be more than one. And the biggest mistake that you can make, and a mistake that I've definitely made, is thinking that if a particular policy has crossover between different departments, then those departments are going to be working together, talking to each other, and very joined up on that policy. That is a mistake. The civil service is infamous for working in silos. So you will have different teams in different departments working on incredibly similar policy who are not talking to each other. So if you are working on policy that affects different departments, it's always best to reach out and have that engagement yourself to make sure that there is kind of joined up working going on and everyone is across what it is that you are pushing forward. So how is policy developed in the civil service? So this diagram is a very simplified explanation of how policy goes from a kind of idea in the Secretary of State's head or a minister's head and becomes fully fleshed out government policy. So I will stress that this is a massive, I would probably say, oversimplification. It is actually, in reality, a very iterative process, and it will massively depend on what the policy is, the working preferences of the department and the minister, how complex the policy is, also how urgent the minister deems the policy to be. So sometimes this will either be accelerated or certain steps of this process might be missed out, but hopefully this is a useful guide for generally how policy is made. So to begin, in the top left corner, the minister will identify a problem, or possibly they will manufacture a perceived problem that they've decided that they need to fix. And at that point, they will then instruct the relevant team of civil servants, or possibly they will create a new team of civil servants, and they will ask them if they can identify and test some solutions to the problem. At that point, the team will conduct some initial research and start considering the various options. And very quickly, they will move on to doing some targeted and wider stakeholder engagement. So this will include kind of individual meetings with relevant groups, which will hopefully include NGOs and other individuals who are kind of activists in that area. It will also include potentially some roundtable meetings to get a bunch of experts around the table. And often it will also include a public consultation, and I'll come back to that a bit later on. At this stage, the team will also be consulting other relevant people within the department. So possibly, depending on what the policy is, they might be consulting scientists or lawyers or kind of web developers, dependent on the policy and what the policy needs are. So that's the period of kind of consultation. At that point, once the team have decided on what the different solutions might be, and they will always pick a preferred solution but have alternative options that they'll also present, they will then go to the senior civil servants in their department for feedback and sign off. And this can be a very, very quick, straightforward process, or it can take a very long time depending on kind of how contentious the policy is, how much of a live issue it is, like how much press attention there is, how much public interest, and the complexity. So once there is sign-off at the team level and within the senior civil servants, the team will then draft a written submission for the relevant minister and send it off to them for agreement and sign-off. And again, this can be a relatively straightforward process, or it might take a very long time depending on how complicated the issue is and how contentious it is. So I'll also mention that throughout this process, so particularly when the team is conducting their engagement and also bringing their findings to senior civil servants, ministers may decide that they want to be involved in this process. So they may come along to some of the engagement that the team is running with stakeholders. They may ask for regular advice. They may ask for meetings. And again, this will depend highly on kind of how important the minister deems this policy to be, how controversial it is, how much attention it's getting in the press. But ministers can be extremely involved in this process, or they might be very hands-off in this process. It depends on kind of the minister themselves and also the kind of priorities of the department. So before I give you a bit of kind of specific advice about how to engage civil servants on animal protection, I thought it would be helpful to start with a slightly bigger picture of some of the kind of opportunities and barriers that we have when engaging with civil servants. So I would say the biggest opportunity that we have is that civil servants are the minister's expert advisors. And I really can't stress enough how key civil servants can be to the policy-making process. These people are employed specifically based on their expertise in a policy area, and it can be incredibly influential when they are talking to ministers about their ideas about how a policy should be taken forward. Just to give a kind of specific example of how influential civil servants can be, so specific to the animal protection movement, so before Labour came into power, they were quite unequivocal that they were planning on ending the badger cull pretty much immediately when they came into office. That was a real kind of firm commitment that they made. Lots of you will be aware that the badger cull has not ended. We've had this government for the best part of a year now, and we're expecting the badger cull to continue, I think, until 2029 is the commitment they've now made. And there'll be various reasons for this, but one of the major blockers actually is that the civil servants who work on badger cull policy think that the badger cull is a very necessary way of controlling bovine TB in the cattle population. So they've ended up being quite a significant blocker to the ministers achieving this aim that they have. So that's just an indication of how influential civil servants can be in kind of helping or hindering a minister's policy objectives. So it's really key, I mean, when we are thinking about furthering animal protection, if we can develop a good relationship with civil servants, and what's key to that is demonstrating to them that we are a kind of trustworthy and authoritative source of information on an issue, then that can really, really help us in achieving our policy aims. The other thing to mention on opportunities is that many civil servants who work on policies like animal protection and also environmental policy are doing so because they really care about animal protection or environmental protection. So they are immediately kind of allies in our fight to help and protect animals. I will caveat that by saying that often the people working at the kind of policy team level will be very pro increasing protections for animals. But the further you go up the civil service chain, so as soon as you get to a more senior civil servant level, then they may not be quite as big advocates for the policy. And also you do see some kind of apathy setting in, and kind of perceived barriers will often be put in place at the more senior civil servant levels. So if you are seeing kind of blockers being put in the way, often it's not from a lack of will and desire to make change at the kind of team level. Often there are blockers and political appetite that has to be put into the mix as well. But I would still say that if we view these people as people that we want to work with to increase animal protection, because generally they do have that same desire that we do, and we furnish them with the arguments that they need to make the best case for increasing protection for animals, then often they will make that case when they are then talking to more senior civil servants and of course to ministers. So then looking at some of the barriers, I think on a related note, so at the team level, the team of kind of policy professionals, they then have to persuade senior civil servants and ministers to adopt their preferred solution. And as I said before, there can be some real barriers in the way of doing that. Often it will be kind of at the mercy of political will and priorities. It might be, so we have a government right now that is very, very focused on cost-cutting measures. They don't want to be spending any public money where they don't have to. And so that can be a big barrier to persuading senior civil servants and ministers that they should move forward with a proposed policy. Also, something else to mention is that generally in the civil service, so I said that civil servants are employed by the Crown, and what that actually means in practice is that it's really quite easy to move role in the civil service. You're not technically employed by a particular government department. So if you see another role elsewhere in a different department or a different team that kind of takes your fancy, it is relatively easy to switch roles. So you might be in a position where you are in the middle of some engagement with a civil servant, and then you are faced with a kind of indefinite out of office and a suggested alternative contact, which can be very frustrating. But I would say to kind of mitigate that problem, it's always a great idea to keep a really good log of all the engagement that you're having with a team of civil servants, so that then you can present that to the next person who takes on the role and hopefully pick up where you left off. Also, don't be dissuaded if the next person who takes on the role doesn't immediately seem as keen on the policy area as the previous person did. Often it just means going back to some of the basics and helping them to understand and kind of making the case for your particular policy area. So now just to talk about some of the ways that we can engage with civil servants. So the first way, and one of the main ways, is by responding to a public consultation. So I've got on the slide there that every year around 400 public consultations are conducted by central government departments. Generally, departments will consult on the vast majority of major policy decisions. So this is a really kind of key avenue for us to use to get our message across about animal protection. So I've just got a few tips on the slide there for how you can make the most out of this opportunity when you're responding to a public consultation. So the first one is that it is a really good idea to seek clarity on the purpose and the expected outcomes of the consultation. This is because if you really understand what it is that the team and the minister is trying to achieve, then you can better tailor your responses to have the most impact through the answers that you're giving. There are some exceptions to this, so I would say that sometimes a public consultation can be a good opportunity to slip in messages about an animal protection issue that may not be on the government's radar at the moment, or that they're not talking openly about. So as an example, we recently included some information about farrowing crates for mother pigs in a consultation that was actually about laying hens, because we deemed it a sufficiently similar issue, and we wanted to make sure that the government was aware that we wanted progress on this issue. So you can do that, but generally it's a really good idea to understand exactly what it is that the team is trying to get out of that consultation. And if you don't know, then you can ask. So generally on the website where the consultation is published, then there will be some contact details on there if you have any questions. So I'd really recommend that you do that if you are a little bit unclear on the purpose of the consultation. The next tip, and probably the most important one, is that when you're responding to a public consultation, it really is quality over quantity. Particularly high-profile consultations will get hundreds, if not thousands, of responses. And there is no AI involved in this. Every single response is being read word for word by a team of civil servants. So that might be 4 or 5 people who are working their way through hundreds or thousands of consultation responses. So it's a really good idea to keep yourself as brief as possible while making sure that you are still including all of the kind of relevant facts, relevant data to make your point as compelling as possible. On a similar note, I would really dissuade organizations from going out to their supporters and asking them to submit lots of kind of identical template responses to public consultations. Simply the reason for this is that it ends up pissing off the civil servants. If they're reading the same response over and over, it doesn't necessarily demonstrate anything new to them. And this is because they're not particularly interested in how many people are saying something when it comes to a public consultation. They're much more interested in, can you bring any new ideas, new information, new perspectives to the issue that enable them to make the best policy possible. I've certainly been in situations where we've been relatively set on a policy decision that we intended on making, and all it actually ended up taking was one response that brought forward a point that we weren't aware of and that was extremely compelling, and we ended up changing the whole policy on the basis of that. So it's definitely about quality, bringing forward unique and interesting arguments over the quantity of people who are saying something. If you do want to demonstrate kind of strength of public feeling on an issue, which obviously is still important, then a really good way of doing that is you can commission a poll. So you can commission a public poll asking the public what they think of something, and then you can always include the results of that in your consultation response. So you are demonstrating how many people care about an issue without kind of inundating the policy team with lots of identical responses. Also, on a really similar note, if more than one person or organization is working on an issue, particularly if you all have kind of different expertise and can bring different things to the answer, then it's a great idea to pool your resources and put forward a joint response. These can be very, very authoritative. If a team of civil servants sees that 6 or 7 well-respected animal rights groups have submitted a joint response and have a clear and cohesive and joined, united view on a particular issue that can hold lots and lots of weight. And it also means that organisations who are very stretched, as we all are all putting less of their individual resources into submitting that response. So it can work in both ways. And the last tip, where you can, I know we're all really busy and we're all juggling kind of 1,000,001 things, but where possible, it's a good idea to submit your response to the consultation early. So don't wait until the deadline, submit as soon as you can. And the reason I suggest that is because policy teams are working frantically up until the second that they hit submit on a consultation. That consultation will then be open for 12 weeks, for example, and during that time, the policy team goes from being incredibly busy to suddenly kind of sitting there twiddling their thumbs a little bit, waiting for responses to come in. So if you don't want them to be sat there catching up on their emails, if you want them doing something more useful, then if you submit early, you are more likely to get more of their attention and more time because they actually have more time to look at your response before they're kind of inundated with lots of other responses coming in closer to the deadline. So how else can we engage with civil servants? So obviously another thing we can do is engage them directly. We can ask for meetings, we can send emails, and this is obviously another really effective way of getting our point across. So I think if I'm leaving you with anything today, it's probably the next point. So our goal really when we are engaging civil servants is that we are trying to establish a mutually beneficial relationship that is built on trust. So we want to get into a position where the policy team that we're engaging has learnt to trust us and we trust them in return. And we have a kind of ongoing relationship where we can build a kind of collaborative approach to problem solving with them. This is important because civil servants are very unlikely to tell you anything particularly interesting unless they trust you. You are likely to just be hearing the same things that are already out in the kind of public domain unless they trust that you are not going to share that information further. So, for example, if a civil servant thinks that you are going to take whatever they've told you and tell all your supporters or splash it in the press, or you're going to send a kind of stroppy letter to the minister and say, we really hate this, your civil servants have just told us this and we don't like it, then civil servants are just much less likely to tell you anything interesting and useful that you can use or further your campaign. And in return as well, we want to be able to tell civil servants things that we don't think they're going to take further or use against us. So it really is a kind of mutual trust-based relationship. So just to give a kind of example of how that might work in practice, let's say that there's a policy issue that the government is stalling on, where you're just not seeing the progress that you want to see. You might speak to a civil servant that you've established a good relationship with and let them know if you don't see any progress soon, then that's the point at which you are feeling that you have no other alternative but to launch a kind of large-scale public campaign on the issue. The civil servant is not going to like this very much, and they are quite likely to take this back to more senior civil servants and possibly to the minister to let them know, look, they're really unhappy that we're stalling on this issue. This is what we're going to see if we don't make some progress. And there are many examples of times where actually a problem has been unblocked and progress has been made after they have deemed a kind of credible threat of public mobilization on an issue. But that really relies on a relationship of trust because we both sides need to know that they are kind of talking confidentially to each other. So when you're looking at kind of the ideal, the gold standard of engagement with civil servants, we want this to be ongoing, we want it to be regular, and we want it to be less formal. So if you can establish a relationship with a civil servant where you might go out for a coffee every couple of months or so and talk less formally and more candidly, then that is exactly the ideal situation that you want to be in. So taking it back a few steps to when you're just starting to think about engaging with civil servants, and you're thinking about writing that first email to open up that dialogue, it's often a really good idea to send a written briefing with your initial email. This is because it can help to establish you as a credible and authoritative voice on an issue. And often civil servants will use that briefing to decide whether or not it's worth setting up a meeting with you to discuss the issue further. Also, it sounds like a really obvious point, but if you do get to a point where civil servants have offered you a meeting, it's really important to send your best representatives to that meeting. So think about who you want to have around the table to get your message across most effectively. So that is likely to be a mix of kind of policy people. It might also be some people with some kind of technical understanding, and it might be some people with direct experience of the issue that you are putting forward. Another one, and this is a really tricky one for us because as a room of vegans, we want the government to move further and faster on animal protection issues. And we are constantly frustrated by the lack of progress that's being made. But it is really important when you're talking to civil servants to make sure that the asks that you have of them are clear and also they're realistic. So there is no point going to a civil servant and saying, we want you to put forward policy that means that it's illegal to sell meat in this country, because there is just absolutely no way that you're going to make any progress, and you're not going to be deemed credible, and you're not going to be deemed someone that it's worth engaging with. So when you're thinking about your policies, it's worth always thinking about what your ideal outcome is, so what it is that you would love to achieve, but also what you can live with. So what is a more realistic ask that gets us on the road to where we're trying to go, but isn't going to scare civil servants into stopping engaging with you. Also, don't expect immediate policy commitments or changes. So the civil servants that you're engaging are relatively low down the ladder. So they also have senior civil servants they need to convince, and of course, ministers and the Secretary of State. So the most that you can really hope for in that engagement is that the civil servant says to you, thank you so much, this is really interesting, I'm going to take this away and I will come back to you if we have any questions. That is kind of the ideal of how that meeting would end. Obviously, you'll want them to commit to certain things, so you want to have an understanding of what the next stage in the process is, and also if there are further opportunities for you to engage, but that is pretty much as far as you're going to get on kind of direct commitments in those kind of meetings. Of course, do offer support and follow up. I think you need to demonstrate that you can be helpful to them and that you are willing to continue to engage on the issue as they need. And also, just a final point, so it is useful to think about other kind of compelling and memorable ways that you can engage. So obviously you can set up a kind of meeting around the table with civil servants, but think about if there are other opportunities where possibly if you're putting on an event or a talk that you might be able to invite civil servants to, or if you can invite them on a kind of site visit or a tour of some kind so that they can get more direct experience of the issue that you're talking about. That can be a really useful way to engage because it gives them more kind of visual, hands-on understanding of what the issue is. So I'm going to finish with a short note about the kind of political context that civil servants are operating in at the moment. So this is Keir Starmer in the Bath. So you might have seen that a few months ago, he was not particularly complimentary of civil servants, and he accused them of being far too comfortable in the tepid bath of managed decline. So slightly rude. And then obviously here's Rachel Reeves with her lovely red box. We also know that this Labour government is very, very focused on spending, on cost, and is really implementing lots of cost-cutting measures. We've just had the spring statement, which was very frugal in terms of what the government is prepared to spend at the moment. So we're kind of in a position where civil servants are being asked to deliver more for less. And this presents opportunities, I think, because Keir Starmer has made it very clear that he wants civil servants to be being bold and ambitious and making useful suggestions for change instead of kind of languishing in their tepid bathwater. But also we know that any policy that we're suggesting needs to be very mindful of how resource intensive it might be, because the government is very unlikely to go for policies which are going to require them to spend lots of money. So again, I would just come back to the point that when you are thinking about how to present your policy proposal, it's always really useful to think about the government's missions and their goals and how you can shape your policy ask in a way that at least doesn't hinder those policy goals, but ideally helps the government to achieve their policy aims. That is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam. I forgot to say at the start of this talk, please ask questions and upvote them on the Hoover app. We already have at least 8. So I will start running through the most upvoted ones now. When I say your name, please do just raise your hand so we know, so Sam knows who to address the question to. So firstly, from Tom Cracknell. Tom, do you think more people in the movement should not only engage with relevant policy areas, but should look to join the civil service and place themselves within these influential policy areas?
It's a great question, and definitely something that I've reflected a lot on personally in my career. So I've been vegan for a really, really long time, and I've always kind of been an activist around veganism. And I spent a long time kind of swithering about whether it's more useful to engage from within, so try and build change from within the seat of power, so within the government, or whether it's more useful to be on the kind of outside, banging on the door and able to shout a bit more loudly about what it is that we're passionate about. My answer to that is I really think it depends on the person. So it's a very personal decision to make. And I actually think we need both. We need passionate, invested people working in the civil service. Otherwise, we end up with a lot of kind of apathetic people who are happy to kind of languish in the tepid bathwater. So we need people within the civil service who want to inspire growth and change and want to push civil servants and ministers to be more ambitious. But that's not going to work for everyone. It's not going to suit everyone. It doesn't suit everyone's personality type. It can be very challenging. I was in a situation when I worked in DLUC where there was a policy that I was working on for the best part of a year, a net zero policy. And then one day that was just quietly put in the bin because the ministers decided to go in a different direction and weren't nearly as interested in net zero policy anymore. So that personally can be really, really challenging. You have to know how to pick yourself up when the political winds kind of shift in a different direction. But I would still say that it is incredibly valuable, and we do need people who care about the issues to be inside the tent as well as outside of the tent.
Thank you, Sam. Next question is actually from me. How did you find the civil service code? Was that upvoted? How did you find the civil service code and political neutrality affected your work, advocacy and values while you were working in the civil service?
That's another very good question. To be honest, I think that it didn't affect me as much as I thought it would. So I was very reluctant to go into the civil service, partly because I thought it would stop me from being able to shout as loudly about the issues that I care about as I wanted to. But you do find, particularly at the team level, that the culture in the civil service can actually be quite activisty and can actually be very engaged and motivated and wanting to push on a particular issue. And the colour of the government doesn't matter so much when you work in the civil service as the policies that you're working on. So if you are fortunate enough to work in an area that is slightly more apolitical, and I would say that animal protection is one of those areas, it's one of the areas where across lots of animal protection issues, we do see support from various parties. If you're lucky enough to work on a policy like that, and you work in a team that is kind of driven and wants to create change, then the kind of political neutrality of the civil service as a whole doesn't impact so much directly on your work and your feeling of working in the organisation. I did obviously eventually leave the civil service, so I'm not still working there now, and part of the reason for that is that I did get very frustrated with the lack of progress. Progress is incredibly slow within the civil service, and you can be feeling like you're really pushing on a closed door, whereas I realised that it actually suits me a lot more to be much more vocal about the issues and to be kind of trying to inspire change from outside. But I would say that it wasn't nearly as much of an issue in reality as I was kind of worried it would be when I first joined the civil service.
Thank you. Next question is from Zanis. Raise your hand. Thanks, Zanis. When developing policy, how do civil servant teams decide which NGOs to consult? How can NGOs get themselves on the radar of civil servants?
Yeah, that's another really great question. So it really depends on the team. It depends on the department you're working with. It depends on the team. Generally, civil servants are looking for voices that they trust and that they think are reputable. They also want to, when it comes to direct engagement, they don't want to be engaging any more organisations than they need to. They want to be managing to get a kind of broad understanding of what the kind of arguments are, for example, within the animal protection movement, without having to go out to lots and lots and lots of different groups. So I would say that my top tips there are finding ways of making yourself or the kind of organisation that you work with a authoritative, respected voice within the movement. That could be by increasing your public presence so that civil servants know about you through their kind of general research on the topic, or it might be through kind of targeted outreach to the relevant civil service team to try and get those direct meetings in. Also, if you can work with a coalition, coalitions are always really brilliant because, again, civil servants don't want to engage any more groups than they have to. So if you are a voice on a coalition, then civil servants generally are much more likely to engage those people because they think that they can get a wider range of views without having to go out to as many people as they might otherwise have to.
Thank you, Sam. Please do keep asking and upvoting questions in the Hoover app. Next question is from Chris Till from a few days ago, so they may not be in the room with us. The question is, are there particular forums that are good places to connect with civil servants?
No, I don't think there are really, actually. In terms of ways that the public can engage with civil servants, I don't think that there really are. I would say that if you are a member of the public who wants to engage on an issue, your best route in is to contact your MP because they are much more likely to be outwardly receptive to what it is that you're asking. In terms of engaging with civil servants, generally the best mechanisms for doing that are finding out who the relevant policy team is and sending them an email to try and get some direct engagement going, or, like I said, responding to a kind of public consultation. But no, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any kind of broader forums that are available to the public that have lots of civil servants who are regularly using those and kind of checking what the mood music is on an issue. If anyone knows of one, then please, I'm happy to be corrected, but I don't think there are. I think it's the kind of hard slog of trying to get direct engagement with a policy team, which is where you're going to kind of bear the most fruit.
Thanks, Sam. Next question from Rebecca Late. Rebecca, thank you. For the context of reducing meat and livestock and this movement, how much do you think policy is a driver of change versus a responder to the rest of the system's demands and wants?
I think that in terms of food and farming policy, this is where we're struggling the most as a movement around animal issues. I think that policy in this area is and kind of has to be incredibly responsive to political appetite and also the public's appetite. And I mean, we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't think this was an incredibly contentious issue. Everyone has an opinion on what we should eat. And particularly at the moment, I mean, we'll all know that this is particularly controversial right now because of all the farming protests that are going on, and the government is incredibly reluctant to make any movements that are going to further upset farmers. So I would say that specifically when we're talking about food and farming, quite frustratingly, this is an area where the development of good, cogent policy is being frustrated by political appetite and kind of the mood of the public and of farmers. I do think that, I mean, I'm hopeful that these issues are going to settle down and that we are going to see some more progress in this area within this Labour government. There weren't really any commitments for farmed animals in Labour's manifesto, so we know that this is not really an issue that they're planning on prioritising especially. But I am hopeful that as things kind of settle down a bit more in the farming context, then there will be space to have some of these more sensible policy conversations, which we know should make all the difference, because obviously plant-based food is, better for our health, better for the environment, better for animals, can be better for the economy. Unfortunately, right now, I just think there is very little space within which to make those arguments, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm forever an optimist and hopeful that, the dial will shift at some point soon.
Thanks, Sam. Next question from Rob Bayliss. Rob, thank you. What might be a good route to influence policy that tackles the climate change impacts of diet, given political nanny state objections?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I've got a very good answer to this question, to be honest. I think this just comes to the root, a bit similar to the question before, of not only is this a kind of political hot potato, we also have a government who is incredibly reluctant to tell people what to do, or to be deemed to be telling people what to do. So arguments around asking people to stop doing something are never going to be particularly effective. I do think, though, so your question specifically is around kind of the environment. I do think that this is a more fruitful way in. We do have a government now who is more ambitious on climate policy than the previous government. I mean, that's not hard because the previous government wanted to do absolutely nothing on climate change, but we do at least have some political will and appetite in this area now. And so I do think that when we are thinking about how we can put forward the best case for shifting our diet away from meat and dairy products, the environmental impact is a really, really significant one that we should be centering our arguments on, actually. It's probably the key place where we can make some progress at the moment. And obviously, when we're thinking about who to engage on these issues, obviously DEFRA, but also Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, it's all kind of joined up in the kind of the climate conversation. So yeah, I do think that that is an area where we need to be focusing our efforts slightly more and kind of downplaying a bit more the kind of animal welfare, animal protection arguments, which are just really struggling to have any traction in the political environment at the moment, unfortunately.
Thanks, Sam. Next question from Faraz Shogi. Just raise your hand. Thank you, Faraz. As an example case, what could we have done differently to avoid the Badger Cold U-turn?
It's frustrating because I don't know that there was much that we could have done. This is obviously an issue that's been rumbling on for a really long time, and we make a mistake when we think that the government committing to something means that it's going to happen. Particularly a new government, a new shiny brand new government that's coming into office and isn't necessarily having those conversations with civil servants until they get there. The civil servants are the same when a new government comes in, and those people have been in the role potentially for years and have very entrenched views on a topic. And so they could be suddenly faced with the kind of harsh reality that there are blockers in the way that they didn't anticipate. And this, again, just comes back to how influential the civil service really can be. And these are kind of the silent actors who aren't making the headlines, but are really kind of sometimes orchestrating these policies behind the scenes. I think in terms of how we move forward now, it's about trying to keep that dialogue open, having constructive conversations with the civil servants in charge of these policies, trying to really understand what they see as the issues and the blockers. Obviously, this is a policy that affects farmers, so incredibly politically contentious at the moment. But yeah, I think it really just comes down to, yeah, like I said during my talk, trying to create relationships based on trust, which allows civil servants to talk to you more candidly, and then you can get a much better sense of really what the blockers are, rather than this public perception of what the blockers might be. And then hopefully we can use that to kind of work through some of the issues that they see as being in the way. But yeah, try and treat them as partners as much as you can. It's frustrating when they're just putting up barriers in the way of a process that the government might have committed to. But yeah, I think it's just slogging away as much as we can to kind of shift their thinking away from the problems that they're seeing.
Got time for one more question. So another one from Rebecca. How much are ministers influenced by civil servants versus lobbyists, etc.?
Well, I think it's all actually kind of part of the same picture for me. Ministers are very, very influenced by civil servants, potentially sometimes to the point where they get incredibly frustrated because ministers can't really act on a policy if they don't have the backing of their civil servants. It's really, really hard for them to make progress on an issue that the civil servants aren't behind, because it's the civil servants who are putting together the full architecture of the policy. So it's really hard for ministers to go it alone, even if it's an issue where they personally feel very strongly about something. But I do think that when it comes to what civil servants think and what they want to prioritise, we do have huge opportunities here to engage constructively. So I think that the way that I see it is that we have huge opportunities to feed in at the lower end. So we are the people who are able, hopefully, to put forward very compelling, authoritative arguments towards civil servants, which hopefully persuades them of our policy position. And then they are the people who are much more likely to change the mind of the minister on the policy area. Of course, there are opportunities to, if you're very lucky, to engage directly with ministers. You might be very fortunate to be, invited to a roundtable discussion, for example, that the minister is going to be present at. But generally, any discussion you have with a minister is much more likely to be more high level because there isn't the time to get into that policy detail. So if you're able to engage directly with civil servants to put forward your kind of detailed, compelling case, they are more likely to be persuaded, and then they can do that persuasion further up the chain. So I think, yeah, in an ideal world, we're all kind of part of the same process. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sam. A quick question/comment from Richard, who said, the talk was amazing, thank you. Would you consider writing up or recording some of these points for the future of other audiences? I can say that the talks are being recorded and will be posted, I think, on YouTube at a later date. But
yes.
Writing it up, maybe?
Yes, sure, absolutely. Yeah, sounds good. Very happy to do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the next talk starts here in 10 minutes' time, Creating Change by Exposing the Best. Otherwise, Sam Magor, thank you very much.